Welcome to Office Hours, Friday, July 19th already, 2024. I'm Brandon. I am a tech journalist, and I've been doing this for almost 15 years now. It's lots of fun being part of this community and making friends all over the world, and being able to engage in different areas of technology, you know, on the battlefield, on the ground floor where things are happening. Umesh, you want to go next?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Umesh from Pune, India, and I've been building embedded software and hardware from past 10 years, especially for IoT solutions.
Cool.
Thank you.
Ming, you want to go?
Hi, I'm Ming. I'm based over in France. Been working on Linux type systems for over 30 years and embedded Linux systems for over 15 years now.
Cool. And Zach, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hey guys. Hi, I'm Zach, and I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa. And I've been a software developer for a bit of a decade now, and currently just getting into really trying to dive deep into embedded and stuff. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome.
Zach, what kind of software were you developing prior to diving deep into embedded?
Okay, cool. So it's kind of storied. So I started close to embedded. So I started before the G1 was made, and I was making J2ME applications. I don't know if you remember the tiny phones, and making like stuff for that, and then kind of got into native mobile development for like BlackBerry, iOS at the time. It was Objective-C, I think, and Android came along. And then suddenly a decade later, I'm doing web apps and stuff. And then I think 4 years ago, I got my first, I got a client and they needed me to do an embedded thing, and I kind of learned and started doing it though. So that's kind of, I've been through the start summer, but it's been quite fun. Yeah.
It seems like everybody or most people these days start high and then start coming down into embedded for one reason or another. Do you remember what it was that the client needed you to do that brought you down into the embedded domain?
Exactly. Yeah. It was we were doing back in Kenya. We had a local motocross race, and they wanted two guys finished at the same time. They tried to buy, and we couldn't decide who won. And then someone tried to set up like an off-the-shelf RFID timing system, and then that didn't work for like 6 months. And then someone was like, Zach knows software. I tried to set it up. I couldn't make it work, but then I was like, hey, look, I know how to read documentation, and it looks like I can write some software for this to work. And then suddenly I was like,
it's always funny to me. It's like, and I'm sure this happens to all of you guys, where it's like, oh, Megan knows software. And it's like, well, this isn't, I mean, this is pretty, it's like saying I know how to speak languages, right?
I think that key thing was we know how to read the documentation.
Yeah.
We can read it faster than the client.
Yep. That's great. Cool. Let's always get a little bit of background. Anyway, we're going to go through our typical agenda here. We just got through the welcome and introductions, and then we're going to get into our discussion today, which is the IoT product development lifecycle worst of. What do you hate the most about it? And Ming, I'm going to call you out for cheating a little bit later. Then community questions, we've done a really good job on that. So I haven't updated that, but I've been going through the server, and lots of the questions have been addressed. So that's great. What we can do to get 1% better by next week, and then ask and gets from the community. Design tips and resources are at the end as always. I'm going to skip over the welcome and intros because we just did that. So today's topic is IoT product development lifecycle worst of. So obviously this is where Ming cheated. Everybody hates testing. I had to put it up there, but specifically, if you're going to talk about testing, because I knew somebody would do that, what is it that you hate about it, specifically in the development life cycle? And more appropriately, what other parts of the development life cycle do you hate? Are you every time you get to it, you're like, oh man, I just want to hit the fast forward button? So as part of this, I put together, a couple different takes on what a product development lifecycle looks like. So, very generally, and obviously these can change a little bit depending on what the product is, depending on what the organization is. But you have your first phase, which is ideation planning. You're doing your market research, you're figuring out what the market need is, you're determining who the competitors are. Then you move into the definition stage. You do some preliminary design, you start block diagramming things out, and then the next phase, you get into your proof of concept. Then you start doing some real design. You got your schematics and stuff, debug and test. Enough said there. Prototyping comes next. You're creating something that's looking like your actual product finally. Then you get to launch and mass production. So you got to do some DFM stuff, or preceding this and in the run up here, and then of course maintenance and lifecycle support after that. If you put that into a visual form, there are lots of different ways you could draw this, and there's a company, Masterly, that did this relatively well. This is a little extended, a couple of different sections of the life cycle that I didn't include above, but this is more or less the same thing, blown out a little bit. I'll start with you, Umesh. I mean, you're a IoT consultant. When you guys create products, does it look something like this? Is that what your guys' life cycle looks like?
Yeah, it's a little bit secret how we follow, but and of course nobody would share it. But of course it pretty much looks the same as it shared in a slide. So very, very close.
Okay. How about you, Ming and Zach? Is it somewhat similar to this?
It looks a very familiar type of life cycle, yes.
Mm-hmm. And Zach, I'm assuming you're going to give a thumbs up there too.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. It's just some stages are later and some are earlier. Yeah.
I'm really curious of Umesh's secret life cycle here, because all of the ones that I ever see look pretty much similar to this, but maybe Umesh is doing something super innovative, is changing the game.
It's basically not super innovative, but I think every organization adopt these stages based on how many employees they have, what kind of skill sets they have, what kind of clients they have. So let's say when we talk about testing, okay, so when we build some of the automotive products, some solutions that we developed for a couple of our clients, we have to do in-house testing, and then we have to do field testing, right? And the field testing is basically putting your hardware on actual vehicle. And then very often I remember, like 6-7 years back, I used to sit on trucks basically with the gateways, and we were just a small team, like 4 engineers. One is a software server, one is an application software like mobile apps, one guy was writing firmware. So it depends on the organization of a company, like how small, how big it is, and then how they split based on what are they building, right? So I just gave one example of testing. We say it's a testing, but again, in testing you have in lab testing, you have in field testings and other things. So that's how the things changes, like when you do what in order to build a certain solution. That's all secret, nothing special.
I thought you were going to say you did like mass production first. Okay. So obviously I'll pick on you now, Ming. The topic today was what's the worst, and we had a little poll. I put it up last night. We had about a dozen responses so far. Ming, you said testing. I knew that if I didn't qualify here, everybody was going to pick testing. What do you hate about testing specifically? I think you can speak for everybody, but what do you hate about it?
For me, it's trying to get into the client's mind, into your end user's mind. You've developed this stuff. You've got a really clear idea. This is how it works. And then you're going to hand it over to a client and you go, why did he do that? So when you're testing, you've got to try and think through all of the, well, this is bizarre, but I've got to do it anyway. What if?
Yep.
And it's just the mentality of it, of just, but I never wanted it to do that. Why are you pressing that button?
Exactly. How about you, Zach? I mean, especially on the software side, testing can be a bear. I'm not actually sure, what with Ming. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of the systems that you've worked on, the amount of code that you're dealing with is immense. As you get into different types of systems, embedded systems, you might have, a few thousand lines of code, maybe even less sometimes. How about you, Zach? What's your test experience?
I'm making time, or kind of trying to split out resources for testing, because number one, you have to get to you can't, as I'm familiar with testing, you can't start out testing, and especially with the software side, you can't start out testing off the get-go. You almost have to get to almost a stable point, and then you build your tests around this, and then you build your continuous delivery pipeline around this and such. So getting the edge where you go okay, now I need to spend a lot of time testing because this is going to stay like this forever. I think that's the difficult part about it. Then also the different forms of it, you've got you can test, you can do quite a bit of testing in software itself, and then there's what Umesh was describing, you need field testing and such, and it's deceivingly large. That's what I don't like about it. There's a lot of work, and you can easily miss out such a large surface area because you just didn't write the note down or something.
It's always interesting when you see the reports that come back and say, 40% of the whole development cycle was spent doing testing of one sort or another, and the amount of dollars that were put into testing is incommensurately large compared to the rest of the cycle, as you'd think. One interesting thing that you said is you can't start it too early, but people have been trying to figure out how to start it earlier and earlier, doing co-design, and then, like you said, CI and CD, having, teams that are moving testing way, way early. Umesh, when you guys, I don't want you to give away any of your secret sauce, but I don't want you to tell everybody how you deploy, deploy first. But where do you implement testing when you're building products for clients?
So I personally follow what the Zach says. We go for development process, and when we get to the point where we see, okay, this is where I should expect some results to be seen. And so it's pretty much close to, working functional product, right? So we don't do testing very early on unless we are building something which is, let's say uh, you are developing a solution where you want to monitor the jigs and fixtures, and those jigs and fixtures is manufactured by very big manufacturers. Now, because they are doing this business for 70-80 years, they know what it is that you have to uh, test in the end. So they give you parameters in the beginning itself, just to give you food for thoughts, and then you start building. Sometimes this is very rare case, I mean, just only once that happened, but again, as Zach says, it's always failed. You go and redesign again. Even for the testing, you have to develop the custom hardwares. So even when you develop those custom hardware, you need to know what you are measuring and all this after the development. So I think I prefer always to be after the development, I mean, very close to the functioning working product.
Some of the stuff that we're developing right now for DevHeads, we have, we put our testing framework development at the very beginning, but that's just because we're doing something that we're trying to improve performance over and over. So, having that early is key, and it's completely software, right? We're not doing anything in hardware. But yeah, it does depend on what the actual solution is that you're building. But yeah, if you're working in an industry where it's well known, right? I mean, things can get pretty predictable. Outside of testing, which was the known quantity. Oh, were you going to say something? Were you going to?
Well, yeah, I was going to say that there is just one other thing when you're talking about test hardware, and one of the things that I've actually come across is you then need to test your test hardware. Because we came across a thing whereby we had a whole bunch of tests failing, and it was actually because the test hardware was failing.
Right.
So it completely invalidated all of the tests. So we had to actually go back and retest the tests.
So you get into like test inception.
Yeah.
Like down the rabbit hole. No, for sure. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And you got to be careful because like with us, you know, you implement this test framework, then you implement this CI/CD pipeline, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, guys, this is great, but let's remember that that's not what we're building, right? We're not here to build a test framework. So that's good insight. Now, outside of that, what are the areas that you find the most challenging or the least likable? You know, we had a bunch of people here say maintenance. That's not surprising, right? Somebody said that they didn't like what was it, architecture, I think. It's like, oh, that's a little interesting. A couple people said they didn't like development, and I was like, that's even more interesting. But how about for you guys? I think, Amesh, you said maintenance. Let's hear. I can understand why, I think, but let's hear your perspectives on the maintenance phase of the life cycle.
Yeah, so basically you schedule the agenda for the office hours today.
Mm-hmm.
And just a funny part, we were building on a solution with my team in the afternoon. And just a funny part, I asked them a question like, what do you hate the most? We are now a team of engineers, right? We have a different background of an engineers, and most of the engineers, they said, they gave me answer, I hate everything about IoT, which is very funny answer, by the way. But then I asked myself a couple of things, and I realized one thing that I hate the most, at least in India, because many of the many of the question that we answer is very, very depends on what kind of industry that you're dealing with. So very often in my demographic, in my area, I have been asked by many of my clients to work with a legacy hardware. So I have been asked to build the hardware, embedded hardware and software that can talk to the legacy systems that probably from Siemens or from Fanuc or something. And that is very, very painful because if you know, these companies try to keep everything close, right? And now you've been asked by companies to build a solution and they are your customers. So you can't just straight away go and say, no, we can't do this, right? At least you have to come and show and try. That is what I hate the most, because you can't say no because you already have deployed some of them, and then you still have to work. You don't have the documentation, you don't have the clear access to the hardware, and you know it's impossible. They would never gonna give you, because that's the same business they also wants, right?
Yep.
Why would Siemens give the access to you? And then you would go and ask like, why the hell you want to do this? I mean, why your IoT gateways want to collect this data? You would say, okay, I want to do an analytics on the top of the production data. And they would say, okay, use our platform. So Siemens will say, okay, use MindSphere, or G will say, use G Predicts, right? So this is very painful, that to work with legacy hardware. I don't know what the other people have the experience with. And then adding to the word that I made it in a community, maintenance, maintaining this kind of systems is way more harder, because your clients, oh sorry, I have the power problem.
No worries. I want to ask Ming, for you, in terms of maintenance, what point do you say, you know, I mean, how do you deal with that? I'm assuming that this is built into contracts that you do, right? As like, I'm going to maintain this for X period of time, or like, what does that look like?
It does look like that. It also looks at, I actually spend a fair amount of time building the maintenance framework and the update framework, which is what I'm actually just working on right now, is doing a bit of more work on an over-the-air update system, trying to actually make that maintenance and rolling things out for the future going to be a lot easier, because it's painful.
Yeah. So when you're, I don't know. What do your contracts look like in terms of what you're going to maintain or not? Because Umesh brought up a great point, which is, and Umesh is largely in a product business, is not even services, but even if you're in a product business, you're in a service business, right? It's like, okay, well now, we've decided that we want to do this new thing, and you've sold us this product that we need to integrate with. Now we're using MindSphere or whatever, like he said. So can you help us do that? Like, how do you put a box around this so it doesn't become...
For me, I do it quite easily. Of all of the work that I've been doing in the past has been individual product. And so I will create this, I will write the software for it, then I'll hand it over to the customer and say, there you go, you own it now. Bye.
Yeah, for sure. If you want any more help, come with your checkbook, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you got any of that, Umesh, but we were talking about the fact that we're playing off of what you brought up. Okay, so you have developed a product for somebody because you're in a product business, right? And you ship it to them, and all of a sudden 2 years later they decide that they want to integrate with some new PLC, or they want to integrate some other piece of technology, and now they come back to you as if it's like your problem because this new thing they want to do is connected to your technology. How do you handle that, like in terms of like long-term support, management of your products that are in the field? How do you prevent yourself from getting essentially sucked into a never-ending cycle of supporting customers with less compensation than you'd like?
I think first we at least try our best to solve the problem. Okay, and if we do not solve the problem, at least we prove in the end why this doesn't make sense in the end. Okay, like, because not everything is possible, because as the time goes by, more and more modern hardware coming from companies are very, very closed. So we basically prove our point. We try to show them what's possible, what not. Even when you get a big fat checks, it's something is not possible, simply not possible. So I think it's good for us. We keep it transparency, but they also want you to try and push the limits, because many of these people comes because they tried with these companies, and when these companies ask them to pay a lot more higher, which they cannot afford, then they come to you. So they don't put so much of pressure, but yeah, of course you bring some insights like why it's possible, why not possible, what is doable, what not, and all other things. So that's the data that we present and try to convince. And the maintenance part, which I was talking about, is the same thing, because it's very difficult to tell them it's not just a simple development. It's not just putting one more sensor on the top of it. And then they mix everything. They think it's like an annual maintenance, and they are just asking you to put just one button in a website.
Right.
You might have, like, they come and say, okay, we need just one more data. Can you just read this channel XYZ and maybe show it into some MES dashboard or something? And then we have to explain them whole, which is really hard. Yeah.
For sure. How about you, Zach? What does it look like when you're, post deployment? What is your life like?
I'm in sort of like, I'm quite early on compared to Ming and Umesh in my embedded journeys. So I'm in a place where I've shipped like very standalone stuff, and it's mostly I hand it over to the client, they got the intellectual property, they're using it, and then whenever they need a change, I've usually been able to supplant this change, or if it's something, it usually turns into more work. That's the best way I can explain it at the moment. I haven't yet reached some situations like the one that describes, but that could be just because my projects are so greenfield at the moment. It just I haven't done something that big yet, maybe.
For sure. Now here's an interesting question about maintenance, which is, and Amesh has alluded to this, and I'm sure that you've encountered this too, Ming, is, okay, well, this is an IoT system, and one of the slides that I didn't pick, or graphics that I didn't pick on this S curve here, which is an S curve, it's just a designed life cycle, was it included picking partners or like bringing on partners, which I was like, oh, that's an interesting step to add because you usually don't see that. But in the context of an IoT system, of course, that would make sense, right? You're probably not going to get all of the technology components from a single source. But in a maintenance standpoint, this creates a horrible problem, right? So now, it's like, okay, we go to Amesh and we say, Amesh, you need to integrate, this new piece of technology. And you're like, well, that's fantastic. But, the system that we've built has technology from 3 different suppliers here. So we essentially are now almost starting a new development process over again. Do you find that to be the case where, okay, well, that's great. We're going to have a meeting now with another 5 parties. Sorry, that was at UMesh.
Yeah, that happens very, very often, and that's where it gets very, very difficult to convince all the stakeholders. But having partners is always good, because I have always seen by myself, IoT for smaller companies is not possible. I mean, we can able to deliver things because we have a lot of partner stakeholders around us. So we have a proper, I mean, when I have to do for testing, I have a special companies who have an expertise in it. So when we build it, we just give it to them and they just give us with that. So similarly, when we come with a new technology and integration, and very often, like several years back, all of a sudden people started coming up and asking us to integrate with OPC UA. And OPC UA at the time was very new and we didn't have that expertise. So that is just one example. It's like right now we have in-house expertise, but at that point we didn't have. So I think those are the scenarios where, and then, with a protocols like this, you need to have a licensing. You have to understand so many things in the background, what happens, how commercially that will be deployable. So I think it's very important to have a network of companies, basically network of resourceful people with you, and then bring in this people and then deliver the solution. Yeah.
I mean, Ming, you're kind of a plug and play, like hired gun. So I think you're probably used to working with lots of different partners, for a particular customer.
Yeah, because so many of the projects are pulling in a bit from this vendor, a bit from that vendor, a bit from there, integrating them all. And then you're actually going, so who owns the maintenance?
Yep.
And that's where it then becomes the interesting discussion.
What's finger pointing, right? Ming owns it.
My bit worked.
Right, exactly. I this is a bit down a rabbit hole, but it brought me to the thought, something that Umesh said, which was, okay, so OPC UA a few years back is new. There aren't a whole lot of people out there who really thoroughly understand it and are able to integrate it. And then you take a step back. So Internet of Things starts, really getting marketed in like 2010, right? And there's a bunch of your smart home stuff, and then we go through the hype cycle, and everybody goes, okay, the Internet of Things is dead. Well, it's interesting because, to your point, Amesh, there may not be sufficient ecosystems in a lot of these application areas, right? I mean, there's really, you obviously you have the major consumer electronics companies who are seeding things like smart home, right? Okay, we're going to invest. We're Apple, we're Google, we're Amazon. We're going to invest heavily in making sure that the ecosystem exists around these use cases and markets that we care about. But as we know in embedded, the field of application is everything, right? It could be anything, and the ecosystem may not exist there. So as far as your product development lifecycle goes, making sure these early phases are really thorough needs to include, not just here I had like identifying competitors. It's really identifying partners too, because you may find that you get on an island, right? I mean, it sounds, yeah, is it technically possible? Yes. But is there actually the infrastructure there to support I don't know, probably like some of the smart agriculture stuff you brought up, Umesh. I'm sure if you've brought up in the past, I'm sure you've encountered customers who wanted to do things that there just wasn't the infrastructure there to support. Yeah.
Yes, and really a lot of problem. I mean, if you ask me, the real on the field, what happens, even the cost that you pay for a recharge for the mobile phone. Let's say if you create some telemetry data gathering device, and then you want to put the SIM card. So even again, I have this. I have, by the way, very good backup, but this is happening. It probably take few seconds to.
It's all good. I don't know. Like Ming, how about you? Like when you see customers when they come to you, I'm assuming they have a pretty clear idea of what it is that they want to do, and you're not really tasked with going and digging up an ecosystem. Usually, I'd assume
It's not normally for me digging up an ecosystem, but it's finding a solution that does what they're wanting.
Mm-hmm.
So it tends to be trying to hunt around what are the existing frameworks, the existing systems that will actually fit the requirements that particular customer is looking for.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Umesh, you're back. What what were you going to say? You were talking about charging for mobile solutions.
Yeah, so one thing I hate the most in IoT is when you automate your office. So let's say my office is fully automated, and the shit is happening is I have 3 backups, very high quality, high grade, and it takes few seconds to switch the power supplies, right? So few things, if it's not an IoT, I could have probably just pressed the button and done it. It's a wired and very fast, but you can just do things. Now, coming back to my discussion, like for the telemetry devices, there are a lot of things that affects, and one of it is like the recharge, what it cost, because cost also matters, right? So, I mean, whether I lost the context basically.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure. What we were talking about is when you're looking at doing the planning phase, part of this really needs to be making sure that there's actually an ecosystem there that can support what you're trying to do, because while it's technically possible to do lots of these things, right? It's like, okay, well, you've got an internet connection, you're trying to get data from this use case into the cloud. To your point earlier about OPC UA, right? It's like there may not be an ecosystem there currently to support whatever that use case is. So part of your ideation and planning phase really needs to be making sure that you survey completely the ecosystem to make sure it's mature.
Yeah. So my personal experience in this area is just build things and try and test. Okay. So what happens is when we build, I mean, I built my first solution. It was again home automation. Like everybody, I did this. I wasted a lot of my years in it, and ultimately the home automation failed. But same automation we managed to put into industrial automation. So we modified our hardwares, and that's where we found the success in the end. But even in those days, let's say if you come back to if I go back in India, 2015 wasn't very good internet at the time. There were a data problem and other things. There were no infrastructure as such. But I think I always follow the process of building thing, trying, testing, going through the process, optimistic little bit about the infrastructure. But yeah, you have to have the basics right. So at least when I was building IoT solution, I knew there were 2G, 3G was there, right? Not high speed internet. So for telemetry data collection, let's say if you are gathering out of some vehicle that is moving, or maybe some agricultural data that you collect from remote places, you have to make sure the basic infrastructure is there if it's not the best, but then from that you can scale. So I think that's how I see things, but I never wait for everything to be perfect.
Yeah, actually, I think this is going to be a topic that we'll have at another engineering hours. When to determine whether, or office hours, when to determine whether a market or an ecosystem is mature enough, right? Because so many people, like you said, jumped into home automation, and I don't actually think that it failed. I think it just got too fragmented, right? It's like if we could have figured out a way to homogenize things, and people have tried, right? You probably could have gotten a lot more momentum, but it just got super fragmented from the jump. So that's a pretty good topic that we can cover at another time. The big question I have here is, what's your guys' take on the fact that like half of the respondents here said that development was their least favorite part of the life cycle? I mean, and like sketching things, like the idea that, you know, something could work. What do you make of that, Zach? What do you think?
Well, I mean, you can talk, man. If you're gonna cook, you just need to know.
Yeah,
I bet you all, if you just went through the list, everyone here got into computing, whatever, IoT, because they couldn't fix something. We're all here because there's something we couldn't figure out, and then we sort of stayed, you know, like, okay, I might as well start. It's just nature of life.
It's when it gets hard, right? When you're doing the work. Cool. Anything to add on that, guys? Anything else you want to say about the development life cycle? What's the worst? You know, what any recommendations you have to people in the industry if they, you know, optimizing or getting through some of the places that are challenging?
I would actually add a bit here for one of the worst things.
Okay.
Regulatory. If you're in any regulatory industry, so medical, automotives, I've been in both of those industries, and you know, you've done all of this work, and then you go, right, we've now got to get all the
compliance,
and the compliance with the check boxes that are pointless.
Yeah, this should probably go somewhere here, right? After after prototyping or something.
Yeah, because it needs to come before your actual launch, because without that regulatory yes, you can't launch.
Oh man, so what does that do to your development life cycle? I mean, this is actually, and I think that what I was saying earlier about, you know, test being so long, I think a lot of people are adding this part into test, right? Which it's like, okay, well, now we've got it built, and now we've got to send it off to the FCC or some you know, whoever it is, right? And they're going to come back and tell us that these three things, you know, are not compliant. And now you're back into development after you had thought you were done.
It's not even, well, I mean, yes, there is going back into that cycle of, you know, you've done all of this work, you send it off for compliance testing, and they've come back and said, nope, these bits are non-compliant. So you then have to go back and over. How far back into the drawing board have you got to go?
Yeah.
But it's then also just from the time delay between. So I've got my product, I've managed to finish it, I've got it even through QA, and I've now got another month of regulatory paperwork before I can actually now click the button to say deploy.
Yeah. Have you, so you said you talked about automotive. Have you developed safety critical systems with Linux?
No.
Okay, I was
they're coming into the area. You know, that's one of our future things. Of, you know, where are the suitable verticals for things? Safety critical, real time, Linux. No.
Yeah.
No, for things like your onboard sensors and things like that, then yes. But for safety critical, no. But even so, if it's on a vehicle, it has to go through all the automotive compliance.
Yeah, and that's that's where I was going with this, is that in these contexts, you know, once you change something in like a safety critical context, once you change something, like the compliance isn't just like that thing, you know, like there's elements out of context, but there's also, you know, nested requirements. And so the change in one place is like, oh man, now we've got to go through a whole, we do it all over almost.
Yeah. And it's trying to work out, so as I'm currently in the medical space, of what is actually coming to a complete new submission, what is just a letter to file. Is it a small enough change that we're not actually doing much, that we can get away with just a notification as opposed to a complete brand new certification.
Yeah, man, and it's also super duper expensive. I'm sure. How about you, Mesh? Do you all deal in any regulated? I'm sure to some extent. I mean, you said you were doing automation stuff, regulated and compliance stuff, heavy industry.
So I have two instances for two solutions where I found out this is very, very critical and very important. One, we talked about home automation. And in a home automation, you have very essential component that's a, smoke sensor in your home. And now smoke detector has to be certified by the fire safety department. So this is not a certification that you would get very easily. You have to, sometimes we often talk about a lot of software and hardware, but sometimes you hit the boundary of physics. So let's say you built a product, and in a product you have a certain way how you measure the carbon monoxide, okay, or something. And then they found out while testing your product, it's not a software that's a problem, but it's a design of your product. Maybe the way you build the sensor itself is a problem. And then this department will say, okay, you build something, but that something is not really efficient enough to certify. So this is one instance from the fire safety department. And then there is an export regulation. So if you are building a product which is an export grade, let's say I build a product in India and I want to export it to EU, right? That's whole different story. You have to go to a telecom ministry websites. You have a documentation that probably needs 15 days to read, learn, understand what to fill where. The second is the food product. So let's say if you're building a vending machine or something like that, and then because what you eat basically that impacts your customer directly, right? So you have a food safety regulation and department, and there's special labs, and you have to have the knowledge about that, like how the regulatory environment works, right? So I think these are the few things I just wanted to add to these things, like this. And this probably takes sometimes an year, by the way, okay,
Right.
because it's not a very simple easy thing. And sometimes I remember that we ended up hiring the consultant of a specialist. So food specialist, fire a specialist who have done PhD and master's degree in the fire department or something. So it has nothing, I would not say nothing to do with IoT, but that's just one aspect to look at the physics and other part. Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Yep. No, for sure. And I think that that's really one of those big boundaries, and like I brought up before, people were saying IoT's dead. It's like, well, it's not dead. It just has reached a chasm where in a lot of these use cases, you have to bring a domain expert in because you're a technologist. You don't know everything there is to know about food safety or, smoke alarm regulation. And, that adds time and cost. Well, very good. All right, guys. Well, I really appreciate your guys' input and feedback here. It's fun stuff and interesting to see where everybody is having challenges across the development lifecycle. If you have questions about the development lifecycle itself, pain points, areas where you think that you may be inefficient and could increase your efficiency, these guys and others in the server are expert resources to see if there might be some workarounds. So just ping your questions into the general chat, and we'll see if we can get them addressed. Coming up, we sort of hinted at this, but we got a few office hour sessions that are going to start getting targeted here. In engineering hour, we've been building up towards talking about multitasking and RTOSes, and then on into the operating system land. We're gonna mirror those with sessions in office hours. So when is it time to stick with bare metal? Are you ready for an RTOS? And then moving up on into embedded Linux, specifically looking at Yocto, Pokey, and Open Embedded, and the differences between those three because they are not the same. And then we'll have a sit with all of our experts where you guys can all ask questions, etc. The next engineering hour is on interrupts. Umesh, do you want to talk a little bit about the next couple of engineering hours that are coming up, and how you're going to handle those?
Yeah, so in the next few engineering hours, we will be exploring the interrupt, and especially in the ARM Cortex M architecture, we have this interesting concept called NVIC, Nested Vector Interrupt Controller. And we will be exploring how the multitasking can be done using interrupt. Because I have seen many people write the firmware, and sometimes they write firmware where you don't even need to use RTOS that can be easily handled over interrupt, and but they still put RTOS by not knowing, okay, this can be handled by just an interrupt. So I think if somebody wants to explore how efficiently used interrupt in their firmware design, then they should consider joining us into the next engineering hours episodes.
Great. Yeah, and there'll be a few of those, and we're going to start them next Sunday. So not this coming Sunday, but next Sunday, the 28th. And sorry, because we're international, we sometimes flip-flop back and forth between the convention here, but this is the American way, 7/28. I think rest of world probably writes it more like this. So 28/7. So July 28th. We've got a bunch of these kit reviews that are finalizing right now. Polar Fire, Nordic one. I know Navdeep just completed one on AVR. So I'm going to be publishing those within the next couple of days onto the server. So you can check those out. They're awesome, reviews into these kits and how you could get started with them pretty quickly. And then we've also got a parallel effort underway where we've got some getting started quizzes and things like that to help you get off the ground with some of these. Continuous improvement, what can we do to get 1% better by next week? For my part, I think that getting the guys together and making sure that we've got a roadmap for the upcoming office hours and engineer hours is a big step. So we'll start getting that published out so you guys can all plan. Anything else? Anybody have any suggestions for things we can do to improve over the next week? Still operating at 100%. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Again, everybody bring their little grain of sand to the community. Really feel grateful to be part of this. And that's it. I hope you guys have a great weekend and a great week, and we'll see you next Friday.